Okay. All right. So just to do this last paragraph, where we were talking about um, how often or with what frequency is a person obligated to tithe. It's pretty intuitive, right? We didn't see any chidushim here. Ulam, he says, Hadvarim amurim rak legabi misha mafresh meiser ksafim mikol harevachim shalo ve'eno menake mehem shum hotzaos. Right? Up until now, we've been talking about someone who chooses to tithe from all of his income and does not deduct any of his expenses. Or if he only deducts known expenses that are pretty static for every month. So let's say he knows he spends this much on transportation and this much on his daughter's tuition. Ulam legabi mishimanaka meharavachim shalohot so shanos she'enen yeduos lo merosh. But if a person has to deduct additional expenses that are not readily available, that he can identify them and that he knows how much they are each month, so then such a person should not tithe more than once a month, like we had suggested, like tithe with each paycheck. No, he says if you're incurring additional expenses and they vary from month to month, then you should only tithe once a month. And that's how you'll get to the correct amount. Okay, now let's go to the next shuva. The inyan pitur mishmira b'kasbei tzedakah. What is my level of responsibility to watch over my tzedakah money? And what happens, who's responsible, who's liable if tzedakah money gets lost? She'ela. So here's the question. She'imo nasan la'ani mikasbe meiser shelo, u'mikasbe kupas tzedakah sheyesh lo beveso. So Shimon gave a certain ani, we'll call him ani, okay? He gives to a particular ani his meiser money, and he gave him from the money from his pushka. La'achar mikein hisbarer sha'oso ani yadua ka'adam she'einenu hagun klal. Then it's discovered that ani is really not a decent person at all. Shelo mitkayemet bo mitzvahs tzedakah. And it is actually, he did not fulfill his mitzvah of tzedakah through this poor person, because this person actually turns out not to be poor. He's just a scammer. So now the question is, what's Shimon's level of responsibility? Does he have to now replace that meiser money that he gave to the scammer with other meiser money? In other words, what's my responsibility if I dutifully tithed my tzedakah, gave it to a charity that I thought was legit? Turns out that it wasn't legit. So it turns out retroactively that my money wasn't tithed, but rather it was flushed down the toilet. So do I now have to replace that tithe with other money? Or can I basically say, no, since my effort was to give tzedakah, that money went to what I thought was tzedakah, and therefore I'm patur from giving tithing further. Okay, so before we see the answer, what are your thoughts? Anyone want to comment on what? Okay, let me give you an illustration. So you want to say, well, it goes according to your kavana, as long as your kavana was proper, right? What if someone gives you their lulav and esrog, you make the bracha, you shake the lulav and esrog, and you're yotzei. Later on, you discover that was no esrog, that was a lemon. Okay, the guy tried to pass off. In other words, he used his child's chinuch set, and or either intentionally or accidentally gave you a lemon instead of an esrog. Can you say, well, it was my intention, and so therefore I'm putter.
Rabbi, would it be different?
What's that?
On a lulav and esrog, you make a bracha, but on tzedakah, you don't make a bracha. Is there any?
I don't know that would make a difference. There's a number of answers as to why you don't make a bracha on tzedakah. One of the reasons actually that's offered is that it's anytime there's a mitzvah that's tolui ba'acherim, that's dependent upon a second party, you don't make a bracha because you can't be 100% sure that you're going to fulfill it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it does. But that's really our question. Okay, I was relying on a second party to fulfill this mitzvah. Well, he's gone. He was you should have detected it from the Pakistani accent, but you didn't. Hello, sir. We are collecting for the Tomchei Shabbat. Yeah. Check it out. Okay, break the ice. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, let's take a look at the tshuva. Tchila yesh la'agdim. So, as an introduction, shemi shenifkedu etzlo mos aniyim, that if someone was entrusted with tzedakah money, impasha bahem ohizik osam biyadayim. Let's say a person was negligent with tzedakah money, and someone gave him an envelope filled with cash and said, "This is for charity X," and the guy leaves it on his shtender, okay, or or even damages it actively. Kasav achavos yoyer shepater b'dinei adam milashalem shenemar lishmor v'lo lechalek la'aniyim v'chayv lotzeis b'dinei shamayim. So the Chavos Yoyer in a tshuva writes that this person is not obligated to pay the money back. At least he cannot be held liable in a mortal court, but he will be held liable in a heavenly court. So, and the way we derive this is that the Torah, when it talks about the laws of a shomer, of what's a person's obligation to watch over someone else's property, the Torah says lishmor, to watch over it for the sake of the individual who entrusted it to him. But if I gave someone something to watch over for the sake of the poor, that's excluded from this law of shemira, of what a person is obligated to watch over something. Right. In other words, he doesn't have the status of even a shomer chinam. Even if he's negligent, he will not be liable. Normally, if you give me something of yours to watch and I'm negligent with it, even though I'm watching it for you as a favor to you, I still have to pay you. So, you give me, you say, here, hold on to this for a second. And instead of holding on to it, I drop it onto the floor and it breaks. I'm liable because you entrusted it to me. But in this case, I drop the money on the floor and I walk away. I'm going to be patur b'dinei adam, v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim. I can't be held liable in a human court, but I'm going to be liable in a heavenly court. But it means that the Beis Din can't hold me liable. Yeah, in other words, a person will face a spiritual penalty because he was not erlich, he was not a good person. So this is talking about where someone was entrusted with tzedakah money. However, in a case where a person pledged that he was going to tithe his profits, and he ended up, let's say, with some kind of negligently losing that money, then the Chassam Sofer says it's as if a person made a pledge that it is incumbent upon me not that the money is tzedakah, but I have an obligation to tithe. Because he didn't specifically pledge to use this money in this particular envelope to give to charity. He pledged to give 10% of his income to charity. In other words, the Chassam Sofer's view is that when a person pledges to give money to tzedakah, he can't absolve himself by saying, I put aside the money and now the money's gone. So we're talking about a guy who promises charity X, I'm going to give you $1,000. He sets aside the $1,000, and lo and behold, that money gets stolen. So who's liable? Charity X never received the money. The fellow says, but I put it aside and I was planning to give it to you. It just got stolen. So who's liable in that situation? The Chassam Sofer says that the pledger still has to make good on his pledge, since it was a pledge, a commitment on his person, not a commitment that it would be specifically that money. Okay? V'lochein im hifrish meiser upasha bishmiraso lo chalalav haptur mishmira deleil. And therefore, if a person pledged to tithe his income, put aside 10% of his salary, let's say, in an envelope, and then negligently that money was lost, he cannot say, well, I'm exempt, like in the previous case. The chayiv l'shalim b'dinei adam af im kara ones, and he's going to be liable even on a human level. In other words, Charity X could take this guy to court and say, listen, we saw this man publicly pledge to tzedakah. We have documentation, or we have witnesses that this man made this pledge. He sent us an email with a pledge. We have this. The Beis Din will make him liable to pay. Because that's his obligation. Now, with that in mind, ulam imnosan tzedakah letoch kupas tzedakah sheyesh lo beveso shelo b'toras meiser. But what if a person put money in his pushka? Guy's got a pushka in it. Does everyone still have pushkas in their house? I don't think I've put money in a house pushka. My wife does it. I don't put any coins in, but maybe I don't know. I haven't asked my wife, where's our pushka? I know, I guess maybe you'd put your spare change, right? If you don't need the change, you put it in the pushka. Yeah, I just don't use pushkas. Next to the candles. Yeah, she keeps it next to the candles. But when do I go next to the candles? Like that's her space, right? I think I put money in the pushka when I was at the airport just now in Israel. Went to the Chabad stand, put money in the pushka. Okay. However, im nosan tzedakah l'soch kupas tzedakah sheish lo bevesa. So if you put money in the pushka in your house, right, and it wasn't saying, okay, I'm going to use this as my tithe. Nechshav ka'omer harezu depoter me'achrayis v'yatzi yedei nidra. So the money that you put in a pushka is not where you're pledging yourself to give a certain amount, but it's on the coin. So there are two types of charitable giving. There's one where you make a pledge that I'm going to make sure that a certain amount of money gets to charity X. That's the first case. The second case is where you have spare change, you put it in the pushka. You're not even thinking about making sure that charity X gets a certain amount of money. You just want to make this money, this specific coin, you want to make it into tzedakah. So you fulfilled your pledge by dropping it in the pushka. B'shuv dino k'mishen ifkedu etzlo ma'os aniyim. And now that pushka that's filled with coins is no different than a person who's entrusted with an envelope of cash for charity. Even if he's negligent, he will not have to, and it gets lost or stolen, he will not have to replace that money, at least b'dinei adam. Lefi zeh b'nidon didan legabe ksafim hamunachim bekupas tzedakah sheyesh lo beveso. So therefore, in a situation where you're giving money that was in your pushka, and you're giving it to the ani from Pakistan. So dino kamishan ifkadu etzlo ma'us aniim v'hizik osam biyadayim. So it's as if you were given someone else's tzedakah money, you were negligent or you damaged it. Ulafia chabos yar poter bedine adam midin delishmor v'chayv lotzes bedine shamayim. And therefore, according to the chavos yar that we quoted above, you'd be poter. Certainly, no one could hold you liable to replace that money, but there would be a heavenly obligation to approximate how much money that was in that pushka and to replace it. Ve'ilu legabe kaspe meiser shelo chayiv l'shalem b'dinei adam kehachasam sofer. However, if it was your tithe, your monthly tithe, your annual tithe, and you lost that money because you gave it to a swindler charity, so then you'd have to actually replace that money according to the Chasam Sofer. So his conclusion is interesting. Not sure that I fully agree with it. We have to think about this for a second. What he's essentially arguing is that there's two types of charity. There's a charity which is Harei Alai, and there's another charity which is Harei Zu. Okay? So I hope, did I make the distinction clear? Harei Alai means I'm going to make sure that that a certain amount of my income goes to charity. That's what you do when you tithe. But there's another charity, which is Harei Zu. This money is going to the pushka, right? Without committing that it's necessarily charity money. Well, it is charity money, but it's not for any particular charity, but it's not incumbent upon me to tithe or to give a certain amount, but whatever money I have, I want to make this coin into charity. So in the first case, you're going to have to replace it if it gets lost or stolen. In the second case, you will not have to replace it if it gets lost or stolen, at least not b'dinei adam, but b'dinei shamayim, you are going to be held liable. So I'm going to make two statements that I feel that the author has been overly machmir over here. Okay, I don't feel that tithing is in the same category as the case that the Chasam Sofer was discussing. The case that the Chasam Sofer was discussing was where a person made a pledge to a specific charity. Okay, that's very different from committing yourself to tithe your tzedakah. When I commit myself to tithe my tzedakah, I haven't even decided which charity I'm going to give the money to. And I think for that reason, I hear the distinction he's making where you say, you're basically saying, Harei Alai, it's incumbent upon me to give this money, to give my income to tzedakah. But I also feel that you can make the argument that implicit in the pledge to tithe is also to do your best to make sure that that money reaches a charity. But if even after doing your due diligence, you ended up getting swindled by someone who's a shyster, and by the way, this is not so far-fetched. There are cases like this where a person comes into town, says he's collecting for a particular mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim, like a really, really we got to help this guy. He's being held captive, and I'm going to save Jews from Ethiopia. And he comes up with this cockamamie story, comes into town, and then all of a sudden, after he gets his briefcase full of cash, he disappears, and it turns out that his charity was not legit. This has happened before. It's not like this has never happened before. So I think that because this idea of pledging a tenth of your income, number one, it's not obligatory from the standpoint of tzedakah in the first place. It is a minhag. It is a minhag that, according to the Taz, is an obligation based on Meiser Ani. But at the same time, it's it's implicit in the pledge to tithe that you'll do your best to make sure that it gets to aniyim. So I don't agree that this is analogous to the case of the chasam sofer. I think you can only make that argument if you look at your tithe the way that the Taz was looking at the tithe, that it's like Meiser Ani from your agriculture. So like here's a good illustration. If a person tithes Meiser Ani, or if a person tithes regular Meiser from his agriculture, from his grain, and he ends up giving it to a person who represents himself as a Levi or an Ani, and is not a Levi, and is not an Ani, so then I think I hear that argument that you say, well, you didn't fulfill your law of Meiser because you didn't give it to an Ani, you gave it to a shyster instead of an Ani, or you didn't give it to a Levi, or you didn't give your truma to a Kohen, right? That I hear. But Meiser is not in the same realm exactly as Meiser Ani. And therefore, I think it all goes back to this argument between the Taz and other poskim. All right, so let's see if there's any further notation.
So Rabbi, just a question here.
Yeah.
Why,
Doug, hi.
Hi, sorry. Why is it that if an ani comes to ask for money from you, like he's approached you, and under false pretenses he's got some story that he's, he needs the money, so you give him some money, why is he not treated as if he stole the money? I mean, there was a situation, I can't remember, a number of years ago where a poster was put up at Aisha Torah saying that do not give money to these particular people, two faces, because their story is false and they're collecting under false pretenses. So why is it not treated as if they're a thief?
Well, they are, but fine. So we've now identified them as Ganavim, but they're back in Pakistan now. What does that have to do with my halachic obligation? In other words, you're right. I think that goes without saying that the shyster who's falsely collecting tzedakah is a ganav, right?
But if that's the case, then you gave the money to them on the understanding of their story.
Yeah, but still the question is, did I fulfill my obligation, my pledge to tithe my income? Did I end up tithing my income and giving it to charity? So on the one hand, the argument is, no, I didn't. The author of this sefer wants to argue that based on the tshuva from the Chasam Sofer that we saw, which I don't think is fully analogous, but the Chasam Sofer's case is clear. When you make a pledge to give $1,000 to charity X and that money gets stolen, so, or, let's say a guy misrepresents himself and he says, I'm the fundraiser from charity X. Okay, let's say he comes and he says, I'm from Magen David Adom, and you had pledged to you're going to give $1,000 to Magen David Adom. Okay, and it turns out that he's not from Magen David Adom. He's a fraud, and so he leaves town, and you were expecting some certificate or letter from Magen David Adom, and so you call the office in Israel, and you say it's been 3 months and I haven't heard from you guys. Didn't get my receipt. What's going on? So they say, well, we have no record of your donation. And you track it down, and they say, who did you give your donation to? Well, I gave it to Mr. So-and-so. Mr. So-and-so, we have no idea who that is. Okay, so you're right. Mr. So-and-so is a ganav. He misrepresented himself as the fundraiser for Magen David Adom, and you now have lost your $1,000. But Magen David Adom says, by the way, would you mind fulfilling your pledge? We never received your $1,000. So according to the Chasam Sofer, that's clear. You have to pay the $1,000 to Magen David Adom. Just because this guy swindled you does not absolve you from paying that amount. So Doug, can we agree on that?
Yes, I agree with that. But
Okay.
Okay, so carry on.
Now, the question is, what if a person committed himself to tithe his money and give 10% to charity? The author of this sefer is suggesting that that's no different from the case of the Chasam Sofer, where a person made a pledge to specifically give this money to charity, and it ended up not getting to charity. I take issue with that. That's the part where I'm questioning the author of this sefer to say that may not be analogous. I'm not sure. Okay.
So that's that. We're at the same place. Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Right. Good. Okay. So let's take a look at the biurim on the bottom. We'll just start it today. Inei b'shulchan aruch kosav ezel l'shanim. Mi shenifkedu etzlo mos aniyim upasha bahem v'nignavu pater shenemar lishmor v'lo l'chalek l'aniyim v'arehu mamon shein lo tovin ad kan l'shanim. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if a person was given money that was set aside for the poor, he's given an envelope of cash, and it was set aside for the poor, and then he is posheya, and then he is negligent, and that money gets stolen. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that he is exempt from replacing that money because he does not have the status of a shomer. The Torah only assigns a person the status of a shomer, of a guard who has certain obligations, when the money is owned by a private individual. But when it's owned by faceless and nebulous poor people that we are not specifically identified, so then that person is not going to be liable to replace the money. The cost of a Pischei Tshuva, the Pischei Tshuva's comment on that is, B'shem shut chavos yoyer the pater b'dinei adam b'chayv lotzeis yidei shamayim. That the chavos yoyer says that you're exempt only from a human court, but you still have a heavenly obligation to replace that money. Chen kosav hakneses hakdola v'hosif b'shut tzitz Eliezer shelefi hashach amachne Ephraim v'shut maram shik pater b'chi hagavna afilu melotzeis yidei shamayim. Now the tzitz Eliezer adds, and I think that what I'd like to do when I get back from Florida, is to actually go through that tshuva and Tzitz Eliezer with you. He holds not like the Chavos Yair. He quotes from a number of poskim that even b'dinei shamayim you're going to be pater, even from a heavenly standpoint. Now, v'im mi shenifkedu etzlo mos aniyim upasha v'hizik osam biyadayim. He says if someone was given tzedakah money for safekeeping, he's negligent and causes that money to be destroyed or stolen. Cost of a pischei tshuva shebeshut chavos yor pasik the pater b'dinei adam v'chayiv lotzeis yidei shamayim v'ilu b'chavos das cost of the chayiv afilu b'dinei adam v'chein cost of haborach tam v'amachne Ephraim. So the previous case that we were talking about is where a person was negligent but didn't actively destroy the tzedakah money. So there you have this machlokas, whether everyone holds he's pater b'dinei adam, he's going to be exempt from a human court, and there's a machlokas whether he has any heavenly obligation to replace that money. If someone proactively destroys tzedakah money, right? He gets drunk and he takes the pushka and he throws it in the ocean, right? I don't know, whatever. So then, because he was given this money for safekeeping, so then there's a machlokas whether he's pater b'dinei adam and chayiv b'dinei shamayim, or even chayiv b'dinei adam. Everyone holds as he got a higher level of obligation. V'nira lanias daiti shebenidon didan havi kehezek biyadayim mishum shenasam kaspi meiser tzedakah adam hayadua kadam sheina nohagun klal. He says, it would seem to me that if I give money to a charity that ends up turning out to be not a legitimate charity, so the author here is of the opinion that it's as if I've destroyed that money proactively. It's like I took money that was meant for tzedakah and I threw it in the ocean. Why? Because v'hayalo livdo. Because I should have checked. I should have done my due diligence before giving the guy with the Pakistani accent $1,000. The im hayabodek And if I would have done more due diligence, I would have discovered that I'm not supposed to give this guy the money. This guy's not an ani, he doesn't qualify as an ani. And therefore he says, and v'ayin v'no to Yehuda, there's more to examine. We're going to hold it here, Rabbi Isai. I really do want to continue this. I'll be gone for a week, returning Thursday of next week, Amir Tzashem. So I'll be in touch with you over the WhatsApp, and we'll see you